What kind of pictures do you have hanging in your homes, hanging in your offices? If you're like me, you've got pictures that are related to some of your travels. This picture that hangs in the corner of my office is related to some of my travels. I got to go to World Youth Day in Cologne, and this picture represents that. The picture is of the cathedral that's in downtown Cologne, and it's an interesting picture in terms of the top part of it resembles the spires of the cathedral, but the bottom part of it kind of disintegrates into a picture of Noah's Ark. So throughout the bottom part, there's all these different animals and all this different life and all this different excitement coming into the church. Noah's Ark, the gathering of our ark, of our place of where we worship, it all kind of comes together there. And it was a great representation of the fun, the crowd, the insanity of World Youth Day, and also of youth ministry as well too. So that's what I kind of like. I also, in the very same corner, have a bunch of lanyards and that kind of stuff from previous conferences, and that's kind of cool as well too. I always, maybe you do as well, but I hold on to those lanyards because I like to remember that National Catholic Youth Conference, or the BYCC, or the time we were at Steubenville. I like to hold on to those lanyards and remember those events as well too. So much of our faith is tied into our travels. And the reality is in terms of talking about adolescent catechesis, our faith and our travels are intimately connected together. The best example I can come up with in terms of travels is found in the Bible. And travels and faith, we've got like Noah's Ark as connected in travels and faith. We've got the Jewish people traveling through the desert to the promised land, traveling in faith. We've got Jesus in the desert for 40 days, traveling in faith. All of that is connected. We have people traveling in faith. But the best example in terms of catechesis actually is with Jesus also traveling. It's the Emmaus walk. And you remember the story of the Emmaus walk. You hear it every year, usually the weekend after Easter. And on the Emmaus walk, we've got these two disciples on the road, and Jesus appears. You remember the story, don't you? And here it starts out kind of like this. These two disciples are on the road to Emmaus. That's what the scripture says. They're on the road to Emmaus. But I think the reality is they're on the road out of Jerusalem. They're getting out of town. They've seen everything that happened with Good Friday, Palm Sunday, and Good Friday, and Holy Thursday, all those things, and it just got to be too much. Many of the other disciples were hiding away. These two got out of town, and so they were on the road to Emmaus. But I think any road would have done. They could have been going any which direction. It just happened to be on the road to Emmaus. And these two were getting out of town, and they were leaving. Their hearts were broken. Their hearts were broken. So as they're walking along, when the person that they don't recognize as the risen Lord comes up and starts walking alongside of them and says, "What are you two talking about?" They say back to the stranger, who is Jesus, they say, "Are you the only one who has not heard what's been going on back in Jerusalem? Are you the one who doesn't know?" And Jesus says, "No, but fill me in." So, good teacher, fill me in on that kind of stuff. And at that point, Jesus is addressing the context of their lives. He's taking them where they're at. He's addressing the context of their lives, helping them to give voice to their thinking, give voice to their understanding of what's been happening. And he addresses the context. He doesn't come in right away and say, "This is what you should know about it." He addresses the context of their lives and listens to them. At this point, Jesus is kind of appealing to their hearts. This is what's going on inside of me. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I know. This is what my gut instincts are saying. Let me share with you my heart. And Jesus is kind of making an appeal at this point to their hearts. Here you have two disciples, heartbroken from the experiences of what's going on. getting out of Jerusalem, Jesus is listening to the context of their lives and appealing and having them focus in on their own hearts. When Jesus asked them to say, what are you discussing along the way? He also is trying to come to an understanding of what's been going on. And at some point, after the disciples kind of get it all out, and this is a thing that I don't think we preach about in scriptures a whole lot. We don't preach this moment. But Jesus, at some point along the way, kind of turned and directly confronted these two disciples and said, wow, how foolish you are. How slow you are to believe. And you've got to believe, even though it was a stranger, at that moment, these two heartbroken disciples came into an experience of more like heartburn, that kind of discomfort, that kind of unease. You know, what am I missing? What did I not get? What's going on here? I almost feel ill over this whole experience. Here's a stranger confronting us about our weak faith. We just spent 3 years with the Messiah, and now we're being confronted on a weak faith. How does that all work out? Heartburn. It's not a good feeling at all. And then Jesus goes on and starts to take their story, his story, our story, and he starts to put it in relationship to what they've experienced. So you guys experienced this. Well, here's looking back into the Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament. Here's what was said in prophecy about that moment. Jesus gives content to their experience. He takes the context of their lives and starts to give content and meaning to it. He starts attaching their faith, our faith, to their experiences. At that moment, Jesus is moved from their hearts to their heads and trying to get them to think and think differently and engage in the context of what the church is saying